Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of r/ProRevenge. My name is Ryan, the official host here on Reddit Voice, and I look forward to bringing you guys today's top stories. Before I do though, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button, as well as make sure you got notifications turned on, that way you could stay up to date with all the latest and the greatest. My mom is very good at her job and uses her experience to get revenge against a negligent semi-driver and their company. First, a little backstory. Back in 2008, I got a convertible PT Cruiser for my birthday. Yeah, a bit stupid sounding, but it was cheap, super dependable, great condition, and it was a freaking convertible. I definitely enjoyed the heck out of that car during the summer. My family did too, which is where the start of this story comes into play. My parents love to take cruises around in the car. They'll go to all sorts of different places, take the dog, and make a nice morning or afternoon out of it. Well, one day back in 2010, they were driving on the interstate with my sister and dog in tow. They end up behind a semi with a flatbed trailer and big stacks of parts strapped down to the top of it. Imagine whitish, shiny metal beams, but smaller. Well, secured would not be a good term to describe this load, because those parts fell off the trailer and right into the path of my parents. They described the scene as chaos. My dad, the driver, was swerving around the road to avoid falling pieces potentially going through the windshield. My sister was squeezing the dog for dear life. Pretty much a whole lot of chaos. They finally managed to stop on the side of the highway. Family's terrified, the dog is freaked out, and the car is in terrible condition as a result of being hit by and driving over metal beams. The worst part, the driver kept on going. Didn't stop. Didn't pull over. Basically left the scene of an accident with the load still not secure. Here's where the ProRevenge comes in, and I mean ProRevenge. You see, my mom is a buyer. A buyer is the one responsible for coordinating prices and purchases of materials for manufacturing and construction companies. Cool fact about my mom, she's very good at this and has a lot of experience when it comes to part ID. And wouldn't you know, there were parts all over the highway. So she, my dad, and my sister all go around collecting the metal pieces that have fallen off the trailer. She then proceeds to go home and uses her work experience to track down exactly where these parts came from. Keep in mind that the only thing she had to go off of was a random string of numbers on each part she retrieved. Not exactly easy for the average person, and it took her about a week to finally get to the end result of the research. Using only that info, as well as the knowledge and experience that she's gained over the years from being a buyer, she not only ID'd the company who produced the parts, she could also identify where they were produced, the driver of the semi, as well as the destination of the parts. She contacted the manufacturer and threatened to press charges for what had happened. Since my mom had all of the evidence, the parts were definitely for commercial usage only and shouldn't be in the hands of some mom 150 miles away from the part's destination, as well as the vehicle damage to prove what happened. The manufacturer was forced to pay out to fully repair the car, $5,000 in total. Needless to say, the semi-driver was also fired for negligence. TLDR, semi-driver doesn't secure his load, almost gets my family killed, and speeds down the highway like nothing happened. My mom collects the parts off the highway and uses her professional experience to track down the parties involved, force them to pay for damage, and fire the driver responsible. Woman damages my mom's car and blames my mom. Her corrupt cop boyfriend covers it up and ruins both of their reputations. For some background, I live in a predominantly white suburban town in New Jersey, and my family is Asian. Although the town is alright for the most part, it's not really a secret that some of the townspeople are pretty racist. One of our neighbors, we'll call him Anthony, is a retired police captain from another town, but he's friends with my town's police chief. My mother is a first-generation immigrant, and although she's fluent in English, she still has a pretty thick Asian accent. A couple of years ago, my mom went to visit one of her friends on the other side of town. My mom had parallel parked directly in front of her friend's house, which is at the bottom of a small hill, and as she was leaving, a woman driving a Jeep Wrangler with her children was driving down the small hill, but she was still a decent distance back, so my mom pulled out of her spot. The road they were on was really wide, with enough space to fit 5 cars next to one another. On about 40 feet ahead was a stop sign. My mom at this point was already in the middle of the road, fully out of the parking spot, and had gotten about 10 feet when the woman driving the Jeep suddenly came up from behind my mom's car and cut directly in front of her, crossing a double yellow line to do so. Because of the angle she cut off my mom at, the Jeep's rear wheel ended up ripping off my mom's front bumper. My mom naturally immediately stopped and the woman got out of the car after straightening it out on the road. As soon as she stepped out of her car, this woman, who we'll call Karen, immediately starts cursing my mom out at the top of her lungs. Karen told my mom to call the police, but my mom told her that her phone had died. My mom's friend and her son, as well as the neighbor, came out of the house after hearing the commotion to see what happened. The neighbor, an elderly man, asked what happened, and Karen yelled, "Are you effing blind? An effing accident happened. Go call the police. I need to call my boyfriend." The son had taken a law class in college, so he offered to take a bunch of pictures of the scene of the accident and send them to my mom later. This becomes important later. The neighbor calls the police, but Karen's boyfriend arrives at the scene first. When the cop, let's call him Kenny, finally arrives, he asks my mom about what happened. Just as my mom had just started saying her side of the story, the cop says, "Wait just a minute," and walks over to the boyfriend. As it turns out, the boyfriend, who we'll call Sam, was a cop in town who was pretty popular with the kids in middle schools, since he would occasionally visit to talk about things like DARE and other things in assemblies. Sam was off duty at the time, so he was able to come over when Karen called him. As soon as Kenny saw his bud Sam, he immediately went to go talk with him rather than with my mom or with Karen. They discussed for a little while and afterwards sent everyone on their way. My mom tried to talk to Kenny before he left, but Kenny just brushed it off and said he got the details he needed and that my mom would be able to get the police report in about a week or two. When my mom receives the police report, she saw that it said she pulled out without using her blinkers suddenly and hit Karen's car. On top of that, Karen was expecting for my mom's insurance to pay for the damage done to her rear wheel. My mom went to my neighbor, Anthony, to ask what she should do about the report since it was clearly wrong. Anthony was furious and told her that she should go back to the police station and ask to see the chief, and if they ask why she needs to see him, then she needs to tell them that it's because she wants to file an internal complaint. That day, my mom takes the photographs sent to her by the son and goes to the police station and asks the person working the front desk to see the chief. The cop says that she couldn't just walk in and ask for the chief, so my mom responds, "Okay, where should I go to file an internal complaint?" The cop immediately straightens up and says, "Right here, come with me." He leads her into the back. The deputy chief steps into the room and started recording the conversation. Since the chief was out, my mom presented all of the evidence to him instead. After presenting the evidence to show that it was in fact Karen that had hit her instead of the other way around, my mom also says that she would like to file a corruption complaint against both Kenny and Sam. Kenny clearly didn't do his job properly since he did not properly ask the actual people involved in the incident and didn't even note the fact that there were 2 passengers in Karen's car in the report. Even Karen later admitted to an investigator that Kenny never once spoke to her. My mom even threw in the racist card for good measure, saying that maybe Kenny wouldn't listen to her and brushed her off because of her thick Asian accent. Sam, meanwhile, had interfered with the investigation despite not being at the scene of the crime during the time of the accident. The deputy chief says he will start an internal investigation and will see if anything needs to be done. Meanwhile, my mom also filed a claim to her insurance and presented the evidence to them too, and her insurance decides since the accident in their eyes was clearly not her fault, they weren't going to pay Karen a penny and they would contact Karen's insurance to pay my mom instead. A lot of internal bureaucratic investigation BS happens, including interviews with Karen, my mom's friend, and the friend's neighbor. About a month passed, and an officer comes to our house to tell my mom that Kenny had been punished, but there was not enough evidence to punish Sam, and he just wanted to know if there were any other concerns that she had. Since Karen seemingly had not done anything to further warrant any action and the damage to her car was paid for, my mom said that there was nothing else. This is the fun part. 3 days after the officer came to our door, a letter came in the mail for a court hearing. Turns out, Karen decided to file 3 tickets about my mom just 1 day before the statute of limitations. Apparently, in New Jersey, citizens are allowed to file complaints about other citizens breaking the law, a thing that our family had never heard of before until this happened. And because of how late she filed these complaints, by the time we received them in the mail, we couldn't even counter-complain, and the only options were to pay the fine or go to court. We assumed that Karen learned about being able to file a complaint from Sam, because no shit, and that the only reason she was willing to go this far is because she heard my mom had a super thick Asian accent, and assumed that my mom wouldn't know what to do about the tickets and would just pay up. What she didn't count on was the fact that my mom is really aggressive with an absolutely massive network of people that she knows. Within a day, my mom hired a lawyer to fight the case, and they immediately asked to change the court from small court in our town to one of the large courts a couple of towns away. The logic was that if she fought the case in our town, my mom would be at a disadvantage since her case was essentially going against our town's beloved police force, but by putting it in a different town, the playing field would be even. Additionally, while my mom worked from home in her own business, Karen had a full-time job in town, so going to court in a different town would be a huge pain in the ass for her. The lawyer had prepared a huge amount of evidence against Karen, so there was no way she was going to win the case no matter what. Come the court date, Karen never showed up, so the case was thrown out. It was a pretty nice win, but what came after was even better. Since my mother and sister have a lot of friends in town, the story of Karen and Sam doing this shady BS got out really fast. Soon half the town heard about it, and suddenly Karen and Sam went from 2 favorites in the town because of Sam's reputation to the 2 most underhanded and nasty people. Sam stopped getting invited to school assemblies, and Karen was ostracized in her kids' school PTA. Anthony also ended up talking to the police chief in private and found out that although Sam wasn't officially punished, he was severely reprimanded by the chief. TLDR, a woman cut off my mom, damaged her car, and had her cop boyfriend try to cover it up. My mom fought back and got one of the cops punished, and the woman didn't get anything out of it. The woman filed a complaint just before the statute of limitations, so my mom couldn't counter it. My mom decided to take it to court, had the case thrown out because the woman never showed up, and then proceeded to tell a bunch of people in the town about what happened. Soon half the town found out, and now both the woman and her boyfriend are no longer welcomed nearly as warmly in town. Cross post from MC. Don't tell people how to do their job if you don't know how it should be done. Backstory. I used to work at a factory who suffered severely under a director who wanted to make more money, with little ideas as to how you run a factory, or how you see through people trying to BS you to gain a favor. One person in particular was notorious for licking buttholes. When I started, he was the boss for about a third of the production unit, and as it happened, he was also the guy who took over whenever my own boss needed time off, was out liaising with other companies, or otherwise wasn't on company grounds. This guy had a massive superiority complex and couldn't handle being wrong or having made a mistake, and just to make it better, he was also clueless about quite a lot of things outside the machine shop, where he was the boss. Safe to say, my partner and I really disliked him, and made an active effort to work against his stupidity whenever he was our acting boss. So, as for the story itself, my partner and I made up the company's goods reception and quality control department. Basically, our job was to receive the goods and inspect that everything was in order, correct amount had been delivered, no transport or production damages or mistakes, and then prepare the things for storage. But as you might expect, some things weren't quite in order. Some things were unimportant and we just ignored them. Most things we send in to get repaired, and since most mistakes were fixable, and then send a bill to the contractor who was hired for the job. And a few things we discarded because they were broken beyond what we could repair. And this particular ass clown was allowed to greenlight things that my partner and I had sent in to get repaired. So one day the director comes out with the head of productions behind him, wanting to know why a particular type of good from a particular contractor always got sent in for repair, and I do mean every time. We explained that because Purchasee opted to use the cheapest place to get these things done, quite frankly, one particular part was supper. Because it could be fixed so easily, it wasn't really a big deal. He wasn't happy with that explanation and wanted to get someone who knew of such a thing to have a look at it. Cue Mr. Ass Clown himself, who takes one look at them and goes, Those are effing perfect, right as they're supposed to be, and the director tells us to just send them on their way. My partner, a fairly temperamental guy, was furious, but we made it a plan, and Ass Clown and director left, but head of production stayed behind. With every piece of good we received, we'd pull the schematics in order to measure everything as it was in order or not. And then on this schematic, we'd write some additional information. Purchase number, steel certificate, etc., so that we could easily trace everything back, should there be a problem. And for this particular thing, we drew an arrow to the part that was done incorrectly, wrote what the problem was, and approved by Mr. Ass Clown. Asked the production manager to sign it, and off to the goods it went. 5 minutes later, we get a call from storage. So, what's the deal with these goods? Why ain't they in the machine shop? Well, because Mr. Ass Clown said they're okay, and the director is backing him up. Insert curse words, and then we briefed him on the plan, and he was somewhat happy. So, about 2 weeks later, our trap sprung. Our assembly unit, whom I'd already spoken to, needed these particular parts, and they received the ones that weren't made correctly, so they of course contacted their boss, who, according to plan, didn't contact my boss, since he was away, but the director himself, about how quality control had really messed up. Of course, the director came flying over, howling and screaming about our incompetence, to which my partner and I calmly asked him, so it's about those specific parts creating this particular problem? Well, yes, you bloody morons. The director then called for Mr. Ass Clown to come to straighten us out. Mr. Ass Clown stood there all smug, expecting his next big promotion. But we called storage and asked our storage worker to bring up the pallet with the remaining goods, and the schematic that had a very neatly approved by Mr. Ass Clown, signed production manager written on it. The half a second it took him to realize that these goods that risked delaying the shipment, and thus costing him a small fortune in delays, had been greenlit by him was priceless. His face went from, "Oh yeah, I'm securing my seat as the next production manager," to, "Aw fuck, I'm gonna get fired for this." He was later told to stay right away from the quality control department, and my partner and I, as well as our boss, celebrated with cake. And with that, folks, we've reached the end of today's video. If you liked it, be sure to leave a like as well as subscribe, that way you could stay up to date with all the latest and the greatest. As always, my name is Ryan, the official host here on Reddit Voice, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.